Good evening, Brennan. Welcome to the Lodge Hope of Karachi number 337 and our lockdown lecture series, meeting number 47. As all the Scots out there this evening are very well aware, we're in the middle of burn season. It's the 26th of January, one day after the Bard's birthday. And this evening is our celebration of one of Scotland and Scottish craft's most celebrated Brennan. However, Bern, before we move into the good part of the evening, can I remind you of the Grand Lodge of Scotland guidelines that you must keep your video on and a name that I recognise within your screen. If you do have a challenge with your bandwidth, Bern, just drop me a little message and turn your video off. Can I also ask you to please sign the virtual tile on our Facebook pages so we have got a record for history? Thank you very much. For our Australian Bren, who will be maybe watching this on YouTube later on this evening, can I wish you a happy Australia Day from everyone here at the Lodge Hope of Karachi. And I hope you have a few tinnies on the barbie and a few shrimps on the barbecue or whatever they say down there, and that you're looking after your Sheilas. So happy Australia Day to all our Bren down under. Well, Bern, I must admit I'm a great lover of Burns, but I'm nowhere near as keen as Burns as my father is. He's a great Burnsman. And many years ago, he presented me with my granny's first edition of the Kilmarnock edition. It's not, I wish it was a first edition because that would be worth a lot of money, but it was the one that the Daily Express gave out in 1938 that has been pages thumbed over many years in my own family, from the great Tam O'Shanter that I've seen so many brilliant Burnsmen do over the years. But this evening, Bern, we're very lucky to have one of Scotland's leading Burnsmen, Brother Iain Doole. He is president of the Irvine Burns Club. He's a past master of the Mother Lodge Kilwinning, and he's going to regale us this evening with his thoughts on Burns the Freemason. Brother Doole, over to you.
Thank you, Right Whistle Master. A great honour to be here tonight, to be afforded the opportunity to speak at Lodge Karachi and to present my paper on Burns. I'll just start my slides off, brethren, if I can find them. You all see the slides, brethren?
Yep, they're there, Iain.
Okay. Yes, thank you once again, Right Whistle Master. Brethren, it's a great honour to be here tonight and to be afforded the opportunity to speak at Lodge Karachi and present this paper on Brother Robert Burns. I'm sure as we all join here tonight, we reflect on how this January is so different for all of us, who normally at this time of year are used to attending Burns dinners, where we meet, we greet, and we celebrate our friendships within our fraternity, extending our New Year celebrations well into February and beyond. The online Zoom meetings have been a godsend during this pandemic and have enabled many of us to keep in touch. And I must thank Brother Gordon for his excellent work in keeping us all together. Well, tonight I pay tribute to the life and work of Brother Robert Burns and to his genius. His writings encapsulate a simple beauty and humanity that appeals to brethren across every latitude and longitude of our globe. I have no doubt that Robert Burns did more for the preservation of our Scottish heritage than any other Scotsman of his time, and collected numerous old folk songs that would have otherwise been lost to Scotland forever. Robert Burns was a farmer, born into a poor peasant family, but became a talented and intelligent man who was described by Lord Byron in the Edinburgh Journal in 1813 when he said, "What an antithetical mind, tenderness, roughness, delicacy, coarseness and sentiment, sensuality, soaring and grovelling, dirt and deity, all mixed up in that one compound of inspired clay. What a wonderful description of a most complex and talented individual." Well, I often get asked why I have over many years such an interest in Robert Burns and in his work. And I guess it goes back to when I was at Irvine Royal Academy and around 13 years old. We had a wonderful English teacher by the name of Willie McIlvanney, who many of us will remember as one of Scotland's greatest novelists and short story writers. who became the father of tartan noir. Willie was a remarkable orator, and he exuded a tremendous enthusiasm for Burns and for his poetry. I can still remember his renditions of Tam O'Shanter, where he brought that poem to life for 30 or so adolescents, and it certainly awakened my interest in Robert Burns. There have been over 3,000 books written about Burns, but many of them, including the first biography from Dr. Curry, make absolutely no mention of Burns' Masonic career, or indeed the influence it had on the sentiments within his poetry. I have no doubt that his membership of our craft inspired him in many of his writings, which incorporate the sincere feelings he had for our brotherhood and for its tenants. The Robert Burns story begins not in Ayrshire, but across in the east coast of Scotland, Clough-na-Hill farm in Kincardineshire, around 1748, where his father, William Burness, a peasant farm labourer, said goodbye to his parents and together with his brother made his way south in the hope of securing work. William's early years had been bleak in a Scotland which had lost its identity in the aftermath of the defeat at Culloden in 1746. Poverty was rife in the Highlands and the country was on its knees. He, like many others, was forced to head south towards a better life, seeking an opportunity which was not possible in the cold and sour northeast soil. After selling his labour in Edinburgh, he eventually arrived in Ayr, where he met with William Ferguson, the Provost of Ayr, and he became the head gardener at his Doonholm estate. William eventually managed to lease a few acres from Ferguson, and he began a small cottage garden to market his produce. It was there in Alloway that William Burness built the All Clay Biggin, where his son Robert was born to him and his wife Agnes Brune on the 25th of January, 1759. The birth passed without difficulty, but in the following days a great blustering gale came tearing across from the west, and the gable of the cottage gave way. Agnes and her newborn had to seek refuge at a Gidneighbor nearby. As Burns himself later wrote, he said, "Our monarch's hinmish year but yin was 25 days begun. 'Twas then a blast o' Januar wind blew Hansel in and Robin." Thus begun the stormy entry to life for Burns, which at that time set the superstitious tongues in the village wagging that this event was a bad omen for the future life of the infant. Burns' father, William Burness, welcomed the birth of his son and was most definitely the architect of his development in the early stages of his life and made a deep impression on his eldest son. William Burness was a fervent Calvinist, a poor man in monetary terms, but rich in character, sincere, God-fearing, and devoutly honest. While his life was full of toil and disappointment, he wanted better for his sons. The strict upbringing and education he afforded to Robert gave us this wonderful talent, which we all hold so dear today. The young Robert began his schooling at the local mill in Alloway and continued with engagement by his father and a dominie by the name of John Murdoch, who lodged with the family, providing tuition to Burns and his brother Gilbert. During his early years, the Burns family moved from the cottage at Alloway to nearby Mount Oliphant Farm, but it was poor in soil and difficult to cultivate, leading to a life of toil and basic subsistence. His education continued with a short spell at Carcosa to study surveying. Carcosa at that time was a hive of smuggling and no doubt improved Robert's education in the ways of the world. When he was around 18 years, the family left Mount Oliphant for Lochley Farm in Terbolton, where life, for a time, improved for the family. It was here that Burns wrote his first poem, inspired by the beauty of a young farm servant, Nellie Kilpatrick, who he was teamed up with during harvest time. He said, "Oh, once I loved a bonny lass, aye, and I love her still, and whilst that virtue warms my breast, I love my handsome Nell." Burns' time at Lochley Farm in the proximity of Terbolton saw the young Burns blossom into a new confidence in himself and in his situation. Life in the farm was hard and relentless, but Burns was still able to develop his zeal for sociability, both with his friends and the local lassies. Together with his friend Davy Sillars and several other friends formed the Bachelors Club, a rural debating society to improve his intellectual fulfilment and discuss and consider the issues of the day. The Bachelors Club was formed in the upstairs room of John Richard's alehouse, a building which still exists today and is superbly maintained by the National Trust. The rules of that society were drafted by Burns and read as follows: every man proper for a member of this society must have a frank, honest, open heart, above anything dirty or mean, and must be a professed lover of one or more of the female sex. No haughty, self-conceited person who looks upon himself as superior to the rest of the club, and especially no mean-spirited worldly mortal whose only will is to heap up money, shall upon any pretence whatever be admitted. The underlying sense of honesty and sentimentalism from these words identifies the character of Burns, which is demonstrated throughout all his work. One of the subjects of debate also had Burns' handiwork stamped all over it, such as whether do we derive more happiness from love or from friendship? Demonstrating the inquiring mind of Burns and his companions who, despite their toil of their daily lives, they still wanted to meet, discuss, and examine the issues of the day. Brethren, very sadly, there are no minutes from the Bachelors Club, but I am sure if they had been available, they would have made most interesting and fascinating reading. The small village of Tarbolton was like many rural communities at that time, a population of around 400 inhabitants, many employed locally as weavers, the local laird and professions such as ministers and factors, providing the organisation and religious discipline. Freemasonry also existed within the village. The first lodge, Tarbolton Cowinning, were established on the 17th of May, 1771, chartered from Lodge Mother Cowinning. It is worth considering the history of the structure of lodges in Scotland at that time. Cowinning joined the Grand Lodge of Scotland in 1736, but withdrew in 1743 over a dispute over seniority, and continued to issue charters as it had done previously, leading to two groups of daughter lodges within Scotland. This state of affairs existed from 1743 until 1807, when a meeting was arranged in Glasgow between the Grand Lodge and Mother Cowinning, and after much discussion, agreement was reached and Cowinning returned to the fold at the head of the roll of the Grand Lodge of Scotland. Brethren in Tarbolton, they were also having their own difficulties, as a group of brethren from the lodge were becoming keen to obtain a charter under the jurisdiction of Grand Lodge of Scotland, who broke away from Cowinning and obtained a charter on the 5th of February 1773 as Lodge St David, Tarbolton, number 174. The remainder of the brethren eventually left Mother Cowinning, and they applied for erection of a new lodge within Grand Lodge in 1774 under the name of St James, Tarbolton, number 178. In a small village like Tarbolton, it was not beneficial to have two lodges, and rivalries between the two lodges were very much in existence. But eventually their differences were put to one side, and on the 25th of June 1781, the lodges combined under the name Lodge St David, Tarbolton. It was into this amalgamated lodge on the 4th of July 1781, only 9 days after the union, that Robert Burns was initiated into Freemasonry in his 23rd year, meeting in John Richard's public house, which was the same building that 1 year earlier Burns had established the Bachelors Club. The minute on that occasion reads, "Sergeant for 4th of July, Robert Burns in Lochley was entered an apprentice." It is worthy to note that Robert Burns holds the singular position as the only brother ever to have been initiated by the amalgamated lodge. But shortly after his initiation, 22-year-old Burns went to live and work in Irvine to learn the art of flax dressing, and was travelling back and forth some 20 miles by horseback on the 1st of October to be passed to the degree of a fellow craft and raised to the degree of a master mason in the one evening. Burns said at that time, "Partly through whim, and partly that I wished to set about doing something in life, I joined with a flax dresser in the neighbouring town of Irvine to learn his trade and carry on the business of manufacturing and retailing flax. The flax dresser was his mother's half-brother, a man named Peacock, who Burns described as a scoundrel who made his money by the mystery of thieving. And only recently, Brother Archie Chalmers, who's on the call tonight, found in the minutes of the Lodge Irvine St Andrews number 149 that Peacock was a member of that lodge, but was expelled several months after his initiation, confirming that he was a scoundrel, just as Burns described him. And brother, on that slide there is a minute from Irvine St Andrews number 149, recording the expulsion of Peacock from the craft in March 1782. The Heckling Shed was not a happy time for Burns, as the work was hard and conditions would be very dusty and unhealthy. But his illness was not just physical, but indicated a serious troubled state of mind, and recorded in December 1781 in a letter to his father at Tarbolton. He said, "The weakness of my nerves has so debilitated my mind that I dare not either review past events or look forward into futurity, for the least anxiety or perturbation in my breast produces most unhappy effects on my whole frame. I foresee that very probably poverty and obscurity await me, and I am in some measure prepared and daily preparing to meet and welcome them." Brethren, this is one of the first times that we discover that Burns, even as a young man, was troubled with very poor health. Returning to Tarbolton, Burns found the amalgamated union of the two lodges was not a happy place, and after only a few months in 1782, the lodges separated again. Burns, however, did not follow Lodge St David and continued his membership within St James. He was regular in his attendance, and on the 27th of July 1784 was installed as Deputy Master, a position he held until 1788. Well, just to understand, the Deputy Master was a very important position in those days, as the right worshipful master of that lodge was the Earl of Eglinton, who was more of a figurehead and frequently absent. So Burns, as Deputy Master, would be assuming the active duties in the chair. Today, both lodges exist and thrive. Lodge St David 133 meet in Mauchline and St James 135 in Tarbolton. Burns belonged to both lodges, his mother lodge being St David's Tarbolton Mauchline 133, and St James Kilwinning Tarbolton was the lodge he stayed with and became Deputy Master. This is the penny from Lodge St David Mauchline number 133, and as you can see there, it outlines it's the mother lodge of Robert Burns. The second slide is the marked penny of Lodge Tarbolton Kilwinning number 135, and you can see there it records it is the lodge of Robert Burns, where he became Deputy Master. This period began a difficult and misfortunate period of the family's life. Burns' father was gravely ill when the farm at Lochlee had been a ruinous bargain. A dispute over rent with the landlord David McClure ended with sequestration of the family's property and possessions. And sadly, as a result of the strain of this and a serious illness, Burns' father died and was buried in the Old Kirk at Alloway. This is his gravestone in the Old Kirk, which has been replaced several times because the people taking parts of it as souvenirs have caused it to be eroded significantly. But anyway, Burns wrote the epitaph for his father. He said, "O ye whose cheek the tear of pity stains, draw near with pious reverence and attend. Here lie the loving husband's dear remains, the tender father and generous friend. The pitying heart that felt for human woe, the dauntless heart that feared no human pride, the friend of man, to vice alone a foe, for even his failings lent to virtue's side." For even his failings lent to virtue's side. What a wonderful tribute to a father from a son. No sooner than William Burns was laid to rest, Robert and his brother Gilbert moved the family 2 miles to the neighbouring parish of Mauchline, taking lease of Miss Gill Farm from brother Gavin Hamilton, a member of Loudon Kilwinning Lodge in New Mills. The Mauchline period was a fruitful time in Burns' life in terms of poetic writing, and he also continued to attend his lodge and was a frequent visitor throughout the district. By now, Burns was starting to gain a reputation for being a talented rhymer, and indeed many of his poems were being enjoyed by many, mainly communicated by a handwritten note passed around the cattle markets of Ayrshire. One of his most famous poems, To a Mouse, was written in the farm at Misgill. The tender emotion and humanity shown in this poem, To a Mouse, was written when his plough destroyed her nest. He said, that wee bit people leaves in stibble has cost thee money a weary nibble, but thou's turned out for all thy trouble, but hoose are hauled to thole the winter's sleety dribble and cranioch cold. But Mousey, though art no thou lane, and proving foresight may be vain, the best laid schemes of mice and men gang after gley, and leave us noch but grief and pain for promised joy. Still, thou art blessed compared with me. The present only toucheth thee, but ocha, backward cast my e'e and prospects rear, and forward, though I canna see, I guess, in fear. Robert Burns sensitively aligning the mouse's fate with his own situation when his poor father faced bankruptcy and eviction at his farm in Lochleigh in Tarbolton, the factor laying the family's life in ruins, as Burns had done inadvertently with the mouse's nest. Brian, while Burns was having success in his literary exploits, his personal life was in turmoil. Jean Armour and Mary Campbell, known as Highland Mary, had appeared in his life and his farm was losing money. Jean was pregnant and her father had forbidden her to have anything to do with Burns. A certificate of informal marriage that the couple had agreed was destroyed at Armour's request, and Jean was sent away to Paisley to avoid a family scandal. James Armour then had a warrant issued as he thought Burns was going to abscond. So Burns took fright, went into hiding fearing arrest, then in a desperation considered a move to Jamaica to work in a plantation. Brian, this is one of the situations within Burns' life that I have the most difficulty in understanding and coming to terms with. For a man who held equality and liberty for his fellow man in such high regard, and as a committed Freemason, I find it difficult to reconcile that these principles seem to have been discarded as he planned to work within the slave trade. It may be in many ways a measure of the fear and turmoil he was experiencing at that time of his life, if the only way out was to enlist in such a barbaric opportunity. Brother Burns, deputy master, at the thought of leaving his beloved Scotland, was distraught. He prepared to say his goodbyes, and to his brother penned the poem, The Farewell, a very emotional poem which is recited every year at Lodge St James, Tarbolton, Kilwinning, by the deputy master, and glasses are raised to him, to the bard that's far awa'. The final verse is very, very emotional. It says, "Heaven bless you, honoured noble name, to masonry in Scotia dear. A last request, permit me here. When yearly ye assemble all, one round I ask it with a tear, to him the bard that's far awa'." I have no doubt that it was friendship with Gavin Hamilton who convinced him to give up his plan to emigrate, and encouraged and supported him in the endeavour to get his collection of poems printed in good black print. This was not an easy task for a poor tenant farmer, but with the support from Hamilton and many others within his Masonic circle, the project began to take shape. Burns approached John Wilson, the printer in Kilmarnock, a member of Lodge St John, Kilwinning, Kilmarnock, where Burns was a regular visitor. Wilson, as a brother, was willing to print a Kilmarnock edition, but insisted that Burns obtain at least 350 subscribers of this book before the work commenced. This assistance was readily agreed from his brother, and copies were subscribed to from in and around Ayrshire, including Tarbolton. The book was a huge success, and 612 copies were completed, with Burns himself delivering many to his subscribers himself. The book would have looked similar to this. I've got to say, brother, this is my own copy, although it's not an original, it's a facsimile. The last copy, I believe, that was sold in the market at auction went for £92,000. But this book is very similar to the condition it would have been in with the rough pages from the printer. It was poems, chiefly in the Scottish dialect. And the very first poem in the book was the Twa Dogs. The Brethren of Lodge, John Cullen and Kilmarnock, were delighted with Burns' success and awarded him, Burns the poet, with honorary membership of that lodge. Burns responded with the stanza to his lodge, "Ye sons of old Killie." He said, "Ye sons of old Killie, assembled by Willie, to follow the noble vocation, your thrifty old mother has scarce such another to sit in that honoured station. Within this dear mansion may wayward contention or withered envy near enter, may secrecy round be the mystical bound, and brotherly love be the centre." Burns' newfound fame with the publishing of his Kilmarnock edition enhanced his status as Ayrshire's bard, and by this time was being recognised as an outstanding poet. His work came to the attention of a Dr. Blakelock, who wrote praising his first edition to the Reverend Dr. Laurie Newmills, who was a friend of Burns. This letter was from a renowned critic who Burns held in high esteem. As he later recorded, "It opened new prospects to my poetic ambition." He recorded in the letter, he said, "His opinion that I would meet with encouragement in Edinburgh for a second edition fired me so much that away I posted for that city without a single acquaintance or a single letter of introduction. A kind providence placed me under the patronage of one of the noblest of men, the Earl of Glencairn." And it was through the patronage of the Earl of Glencairn that Burns was introduced to Creech, the publisher. He opened doors to the nobility, including the gentlemen of the Caledonia Hunt, whose subscriptions enabled the printing of the Edinburgh edition of his poems. Sadly, Glencairn died 3 years after the book was published, but Burns never forgot the kindness shown to him by Glencairn, and on his death composed this fine stanza. He said, "The bridegroom may forget the bride was made his wedded wife yestreen. The monarch may forget the crown that on his head an hour has been. The mother may forget the child that smiles sae sweetly on her knee, but I'll remember thee, Glencairn, and all that thou hast done for me." The literati in Edinburgh were enchanted by Burns and were amazed at the level of his intellect and his conversation. And his Masonic connections he made in the city, including many of the members of Canongate Lodge, were again like his Kilmarnock associations, most supportive of him and his endeavours, and greatly assisted him in having his Edinburgh edition printed. It is recorded that while in Edinburgh on a visit to St Andrew's Lodge on the 12th of January 1787, he was honoured by the Grand Master Mason Charteris in his toast to Caledonia and Caledonia's bard, Brother Robert Burns. The Ayrshire ploughman had now been recognised and honoured in the highest echelons of our craft. Excuse me. During these months, Burns had graced the drawing rooms of the rich and famous of society, but again his self-doubt was not far from the surface. When he wrote these words in a letter to a friend, he said, "I could almost lament the time when a momentary acquaintance with wealth and splendour put me so much out of conceit with the sworn companions of my road through life, insignificance and poverty." In February of that year, Burns was admitted as a member of Lodge Canongate Kilwinning by the Right Worshipful Master Alexander Ferguson of Craiggarroch and the Brethren of the Lodge. An extract from the minute records, "The Right Worshipful Master, having observed that Brother Burns, who is well known as a great poetic writer, is present in the Lodge, and who recently published his works, should be assumed a member of this Lodge, which was unanimously agreed and assumed." Burns continued to enjoy his fame and celebrity in the capital for several months after publishing his Edinburgh edition. The book sold for 5 shillings. It was a handsome book, and over 3,000 copies were printed with additional poems added. It was dedicated to the noblemen and gentlemen of the Caledonian Hunt, who were the main subscribers, which enabled the publication. Again, there was Masonic assistance with the book as Creech the publisher, Smelly the printer, and the artist Naismith painted the portrait illustrated in the book were all Freemasons. On a Borders tour on the 18th of May, Burns received the Royal Arts degree from the Land of Cakes Royal Arts Chapter number 15 at a meeting held within the temple of Lodge St Eb number 70 on the 19th of May 1787 at Eyemouth. His friend Robert Ainslie paid £1 for membership. With an account of Robert Burns' remarkable poetic genius, the encampment unanimously agreed to admit him gratis and considered them honoured by having a man of such shining abilities as one of their companions. Looking towards his future, he secured the lease of a farm property at Ellisland near Dumfries from Patrick Miller of Dalswinton. He returned home to Mauchline, married Jean Armour, and began preparation for his move south. Brilliant, his time at Dumfries was fruitful in terms of his poetic writing, but a very difficult period in his life. His health was deteriorating, and the toil of working in the farm exhausting in the extreme. Faced with this situation, he sought employment in the excise at Dumfries, was appointed as an excise officer, and gave up life on the farm and moved to a house within the town. He made many friends there, continuing his Masonic life in Dumfries, affiliating to Lodge Dumfries St Andrew number 179 in December 1788, where his fellow excise officer Finlater was a member. Interestingly, at that time in Dumfries, St Andrew's Lodge was one of 6 lodges that were operating within the town. The excise records themselves show that Burns was a diligent and hard-working officer, being most assiduous in the performance of his duties, but his position was physically demanding. He regularly rode 200 miles per week in the pursuit of his duties around the district. His health then began to fail, and in 1795 deteriorated significantly. Dr. Maxwell, his physician, could do little to relieve his symptoms, and Burns was sent for sea bathing on the edge of the Solway at Browell. His distress in feeling physical condition is captured in an extract from a letter to Jean Armour, who was at that time expectant with his child. He said, "No flesh nor fish can I swallow. Porridge and milk are the only thing I can taste." Burns returned to Dumfries on the 18th of July, and he passed to Grand Lodge above on the 21st of that month at his home, surrounded by his family. He was buried in St Michael's graveyard on the 25th of July, on the very day his wife Jean gave birth to a son named Maxwell, after the good doctor who had looked after Burns until the end. Brethren, Robert Burns, as a poet, has a way of communicating the mood and feeling of a situation within a few lines, a skill that many of the great classic poets can master. He began his very short existence with a hand in the plough and took great pride as a farmer. No man has ever drawn a straighter furrow in the minds of mankind with his verses. Think of his wonderful sentiment of brotherly love and a man's a man, which typifies his Masonic tendencies. He says, "Let us pray that come it may, as come it will for all that sense and worth o'er all the earth shall bear the gree and all that. For all that and all that, it's coming yet for all that man to man, the world o'er, shall brothers be for all that." Brethren, Burns wrote of poverty as a man who was poor. He wrote of love as a man who experienced passion. He wrote of pleasure as a man who rejoiced. He wrote of fairness as a man who was wronged. He wrote of liberty as a man who was persecuted. Duncan MacNaught, a Burns historian from Comores in Ayrshire, recorded these words in Burns in 1921 when he said, "His genius was the transmitter of the voice of nature to the wireless receiver of every heart." That is the reason why his works from the very first have been read with eager delight by all classes and conditions of men and women in the civilized universe. They will continue to be read as long as human nature remains what it is. Brethren, Freemasonry gave Robert Burns an impetus for fairness and brotherhood, and I am sure the time he spent with his brethren lightened many a dark hour in his short, troubled life. His enthusiasm for Freemasonry, his social disposition was nurtured and developed within his membership of our craft. Indeed, his Kilmarnock and Edinburgh edition of his poems would never have materialised without the assistance of the brethren of the lodges across Scotland. He was called to Grand Lodge well before his time. During the 15 years of his membership of our craft, his devotion to duty and brotherhood left us a legacy that is probably stronger today than ever. His membership in many ways can be divided like our 3 degrees. The first part is initiation in Tarbolton and his time with Ayrshire. The second part in Edinburgh as the heaven-taught plewman, at the peak of his powers, and the third part in Dumfries during his declining years, his poor health leaving him an old man, though only being in his 30s. Tonight, brethren, we remember the treasures he left us in terms of nationhood and identity. The arch of Robert Burns' life was established in a short span of 37 years. His left-hand pillar representing the strength and splendour of his work, and the right-hand pillar, the beauty established in his poetry. The keystone was the Kilmarnock edition, which holds together secure the arch of friendship and brotherly love that still exists today across the world. Tonight, as we come together in harmony, we join in spirit with all other like-minded people across the globe, celebrating in peace and friendship to pay our special tribute to Robert Burns. Brethren, I propose a toast to Brother Robert Burns.
Brother Iain Doole, on behalf of the members of the Lodge Hope of Karachi, number 337, and all our brethren here visiting this evening from all parts of the globe. In return, can I raise my glass back to you for a fantastic rendition, your own personal rendition of Robert Burns, the Freemason. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, brother.
Well, Brian, you would not imagine that last evening Iain and I were talking, and he was, we all know that Iain's a very accomplished Burnsman and he's spoken public on many occasions, but he was feeling rather nervous about speaking to an audience down a computer. And I would say to you, Iain, that there was no nerves on show this evening, and you've certainly marked well, just like the great Bard himself. So thank you so much. Brian, just as usual, a couple of intimations before I open the mic so you can all say your thank yous, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I shouldn't be drinking the critter. Do we have any questions for Iain this evening? Right, we do have a couple of questions here. You see. So that just goes to show I should stick to the Diet Iron Brew, Brian, instead of that Auchentoshan stuff that's next to me. And those Brian who actually know me know that I don't normally drink the whiskey. So, Sotiris from Athens says he went to the best Scottish restaurant in Greece today to get supper for Burns night. Well done, Sotiris. Yeah, McDonald's. Right. Rolf Kale makes a comment, judge not ye whose thoughts are fingers of the hands at which they lie. Greenland has its mountain icebergs, Etna has its heart of fire. Calculation has its plummet, self-control has iron rules. Genius has its sparkling fountains, dullness has its stagnant pools. Like a halcyon on the waters, halcyon on the waters, Burns' chart disdained a plan in his soaring. He was heavenly, in his sinkings he was a man. D.M. Moyer. Dr. Douglas Nichol, sorry, he's been called out and he didn't hear the cause of Burns' death. He goes on to say he suffered from rheumatic fever from his teens, having bouts of illness throughout his life, and the deterioration in his 30s was a result of deteriorating heart and possibly kidney function. So we do have a question for you, Iain, from Jim Gardner. Question for Iain. His father, William's gravestone, showed the surname spelled as Burns, B-U-R-N-S. Had he changed from Burness at some point?
Yes, the father was called, the family was called Burness. Robert Burns, during his lifetime, changed his name from Burness to Burns in his earlier years when he was a young man. Yeah, it was a complete change. So it became Burns in his later years.
Brother Iain McIntosh has put some really interesting family stories about the Burns family and their time in the east of Scotland, and they've been shared on the Hope of Cratchie pages earlier today, so please have a look at them. Dr. Douglas Nichol comes back to us. The final event was probably bacterial endocarditis, easy for me to say, as a result of his dental abscesses earlier in 1795. Oh, to the toothache.
Yeah, that's where it came from. It probably, because he wrote to the toothache in 1795, and I think it's probably very ironic that was such a nice, well, a good poem, and no, it does bring it home to you if you've had toothache at some point. It was a very good description, but that was probably what led to the bacterial endocarditis, which is not a quick death. It's a very slow and lingering death over a few months, which is what he suffered. So there's a few theories to that effect, but without being there and having an autopsy, there's no way you can tell fully.
Thank you, Dr. Douglas, for that.
Thank you, Doole, for that. I agree wholeheartedly what you say, as you know more about medicine than I do, but I'd also like to thank you this time, because I remember in Grand Lodge, I think you picked me up off the floor one day when I fell and fainted, and I must thank you again for that.
Well, yeah, I thought, yes, I think those who were there, so I think that was quite a panic, because I actually couldn't feel a pulse or anything. I thought that was it. That was a scary day, but I'm glad to see you looking so fit and well.
What a panic in my breasty, yeah.
Oh, there was a panic in more than my breasty. I thought it's a good job I had a spare pair of trousers with me.
Well, thank you again.
That's okay.
That's brotherly love in action there, Brian. It's fantastic. Iain, a question from one of our Brian over in Texas. You had mentioned Gavin Hamilton a couple of times. Is this the same brother from Holy Willie's Prayer?
Yes, it is. Yes, Gavin Hamilton, his deserts. Yes, that's the same brother who he actually lived in the castle in Mauchline, and he was a factor in the area. He actually took a lease on Mosquito Farm and re-let it to Burns. But that is the same guy who was in Holy Willie's Prayer, who Burns actually supported against the presbytery of Ayr, because they were at that time the old list of the church and the new list. They were very strict in the way they lived. And Gavin Hamilton, he worked in a Sunday and lifted potatoes out of his garden, which the old list didn't like any work in the Sabbath. But yes, that's the same man.
I will say to you, Iain and Brian, that Holy Willie's Prayer is my feather's perty piece, and because of that, I think it's also mine. But I could never do it in the way that he does it. And my dad might be here tonight. I'm not sure he was going to come along. Another question for Iain from Brother Alan Keegan. Do you think that Burns perhaps obscures other Scottish poets, writers by virtue of his fame, or in another way, is there someone else we should be looking at?
I think yes, Robert Burns does obscure other writers because he's so famous, and he's been famous for many years, and the publicity that surrounds him is probably second to no other poet. I happen to have a very fond liking for Robert W. Service, who is the poet who wrote about the Yukon. He was reared in Kilwinning in his early days. And a number of years ago, I was asked to do an immortal memory of Robert Service, and it got me reading Robert W. Service's life story, and that's fascinating. So, in answer to the question, yes, I do think that Burns has overshadowed other poets, and one of the other poets that I hold dear is Robert W. Service. But there are a number of others. We've all got our favourites.
Okay, thank you. Monroe McLean comes in. Of course, I'm biased, Iain, but that was up to your usual high standard. Well done. And there's so many other comments like that in the chat room, but we'll read out some of those later on. But I think the Brian will give you them verbally later on. Alec Craig comes in from Inverness. Iain, Brother Doole, it is known that Brother Burns visited Inverness. Is it known if he visited the old Inverness Lodge, which met just around the corner from his hotel? I can't access our minutes of the time as they're locked down in the Inverness Archive Centre to find out if he did visit the lodge or indeed Lodge St Andrews Kilwinning number 31.
I don't actually know the answer to that. I would say that if he was doing the Highland tour, there's a fair chance that he would have visited lodges along the way. It'd be interesting to know if he did, but he did his Highland tour, and there's no reason to believe that he didn't visit the lodge. But I'm quite sure once you have a look at the minutes, there may be some recording. I think it's there's many lodges that Burns visited, and at that time, lodges weren't as well run as they are now. So it may well be that Burns has visited the lodge and there's no record of it. We got minutes away back in Kilwinning from 1600, and Burns was around this area at that time, and we have no record of him visiting. So did he visit and it wasn't recorded, or did he not visit? Don't know. But it'd be interesting to find if he did in fact visit Inverness. But I'd be interested if you do find that out to know about that.
And knowing Alec Iain, I'm sure that'll be one of his post-lockdown challenges to get into the Inverness City archives. A comment from David, Passmaster 153. His favourite daughter, Betty, who gave birth to Robert Burns Thompson and James Glenn Cairn Thompson, were members of the Pollokshaws Royal Arch Lodge 153. They were very active without aspiring to the chair. Interesting presentation. So apart from that, Iain, it's all plaudits to you, but I do see that brother Laird Alan Maitland has his hand raised, so I will break from tradition because we know Alan's a Burnsman as well, to see what he's got to say for himself. Alan, please unmute yourself and enlighten us with your comments, sir.
Thank you very much, Right Worshipful Master. Just when Iain was talking about the Bachelors Club of Terbolton and the Constitution, it's interesting to read that no person shall spend more than 6 Scots in any one evening on strong drink. Is there any truth that some of the members here have got applications in?
Well, we know that your application is at the top of the tree, Laird Alan.
Well, I was on the Zoom call for Terbolton, St James 135 on Saturday night, and I can tell you there's not one of those brethren would ever want to do that.
So we've got a couple of more questions for you, Iain. Here's quite another question. What's your opinion on Auld Lang Syne? Pinched from Robert Ayton or original work?
I don't think it's original work. I think it was pinched. I think it was around long before Burns published it. I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of old tunes and a lot of old verses that Burns gathered. He didn't actually write them himself, but he gathered them so as we have them for the future. And Auld Lang Syne, I think, may have been one of them. But that's just a personal opinion.
Okay. A question from Chile. Has an anglicised version of Burns' poems ever been published?
I think there's been so many different languages that Burns' poems has been published in. I think, yeah, you can obviously get them. But what most people tend to do is have the Burns book with the glossary, where you can actually translate the words and make your own interpretation of it.
I do remember being at a Burns supper in London, Brian, and the expat jock, he was from Nairn, and he did do it all in English, and then line by line, and then in Scots the other way around. 60 Scots was a bobby equivalent to an English halfpenny, hence the term bobby for a halfpenny, off a cheap drink from Dr. Douglas Nicol. And Michael Monroe's put a little bit French. I'm not even going to try that, Michael. If you want to unmute and give us a little bit French there, please.
I didn't intend to read it. I just thought I'd post it. Bête lisse, farouche et créante. Oh, quel panique dans son tien. I guess you might be able to work out what that is the first line of, with panic in that second line there.
I think
little beast. Yeah,
I think the doctors.
Fearful. Oh, what a panic's in thy breast.
I think that's what Dr. Douglas Nicol felt when Iain had his wee turn in Grand Lodge, a wee panic in the breast.
You can find, on the website, you can find a lot of his poems translated in different languages into plain English, many of them. But you know, when I found the French one, which is supposed to be a complete set of his works, every poem and every letter he wrote, I can't find the Master's Apron in there at all. Is the Master's Apron a genuine poem by Burns, or was it just omitted by this translator?
I'm not sure if that was a genuine poem. I haven't actually seen it in any of his editions, so I think it might have been a later version. But it's one of those things that I don't have a strong opinion on, but it's a nice poem, but not sure whether it's entirely Burns.
Okay, thank you, Iain. Rolf,
I want to say I had some haggis tonight with great difficulty.
Oh, well,
I can't get it shipped over here, you know.
I think it's to do with the new laws about exporting live animals, Michael.
Would you like to know how much it cost? It would have cost. Was it? I had to go for a tin. Was it £3.80? Shipping £39.
Oh well.
So I found an Irish shipper for €11 total, but I got it from a French shipper for €10 again.
You need to like your haggis to spend that amount of euros anyway.
Oh.
Thank you, Michael. Rolf Hill from Germany mentions Burns was the most translated poet into the German language, more than 8 translations. Alan Turton mentions the collectors always go through the charity shops. I found a first edition National Burns in Grantham a bit battered. More and more congratulations. So Iain, once again, on behalf of the members of the Lodge Hope of Karachi and all our guests here at the Lockdown Lecture, thank you so much for a very eloquent and inspirational story about Robert Burns, the Freemason. Brian, just before I mute everyone, can I give the intimations? This Saturday, Brian, we're doing something a little bit different. We are having our Masonic Esoterica Symposium. So we're bringing together 5 of the globe's leading Freemasons who have got an interest in esotericism. If you don't know what that means, please come along. It starts at 1 o'clock on Saturday afternoon and will last until 5 o'clock. So it's a long afternoon, Brian, but we have 5 different speakers on lots of interesting subjects. Coming back to our weekly lockdown lecture, and next Tuesday, we have Brother Dickon Sandbach, who is with us this evening, and he's going to take us on a lovely meander down the River Thames, and I would encourage you all to come along and support the lodge that evening, Brian. Brian, once again, thank you so much for coming along. Please stay safe and enjoy the rest of your drams this evening. Please unmute yourself and say thank you and well done to Brother Iain Doole, past master of the Mother Lodge.
Well done, Iain. Thank you very much.
Well done.
Well done, Iain.
Fantastic presentation. Thank you very much.
Superb.
Great.
Excellent. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Excellent. Very good.
Very good indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It was enjoyable.
Great Burns night from Greece.
Thank you. And the best dressed is a Norwegian.
Yes, Eagle, I think he does win that, yes.
Brother Iain, thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Excellent presentation.
Well done, son.
Thank you, Eden. Thanks, Gordon.
Pleasure.
Brother Iain, I have a question. Do you think Willie Fisher would have been known to us if Burns hadn't wrote the poem Holy Willie's Prayer?
I don't think so. I think Burns is that way. I mean, he actually immortalised a louse and he immortalised a rascal like Willie Fisher as well. So,
and he was a rascal too.
he was found dead in a
past masters instead.
He was found dead in a ditch in the snow, and he still had some money that he stole at the collection plate doing his boots. So he was a rascal, buried in Mauchline churchyard.
Gordon, can I give a bit of advice to some of our American brethren regarding the haggis? James McSween, I think, is now exporting it. He's a Master Mason in St Andrews, Edinburgh, 48.
That's a big relief.
Might be an idea to contact him and see, because I know certain states are allowing haggis to be exported.
Well, that's fine. Thank you, Alan. Obviously, for political correctness, other varieties of haggis are available.
Good night, Gordon. Good night, Ian. Good to see you again.
Cheers, Scott.
Cheers, Ian. That was excellent.
Good night.
Thanks, Ian. Really enjoyed that. Very
Brilliant.
enjoyable. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot.
Well
Good
done,
night.
Ian. All the best.
First class, Ian. Well done, sir.
Thank you.
Good night.
Right, Gordon. Take care. Stay safe, John.
Cheers.
Well done, Ian. Very good. Thanks very much. Thanks, Ian.
Good night, Ian.
Thanks very much, Gordon. Good night. Ian, it's nice to see you again. Good night.
Jim, good to see you. Looking strong, sir. Keep healthy.
I'll keep as well as I possibly can. It's getting better.
Good,
Jim,
good.
the last time I saw you, we were walking around Millport raising money for charity.
That's correct. We raised quite a few pounds. A great effort, Ian. Sadly, I couldn't do it now.
I was going to suggest we could meet Friday and do it again.
We'll do it virtually.
I hope Roxy don't have to come to Newfoundland to save someone.
No,
and that is darkness.
and if he does, Seagull, I'm sure you'll treat him with the first class travel that he deserves.
Absolutely.
I'm hoping to see you in September. We'll keep our fingers
So do I.
when we get there.
Yes, I hope to see you.
On the question of the Master Mason's apron poem, Henry Clark, when he compiled Robert Burns' initiated manual, actually attributed it to Robert Burns. I've got to dig out my Burns book, which is very, very old, and see if it's in there. If I find it, I shall put it on the Facebook page.
Jim, you're wrong. Sorry, Burns didn't write the Master's apron. Nothing to do with him. It was, if you look up A.J. Morton, A.J. Morton proved it, and another American writer. It was first published in, I think it was a golf expo, a goat expose about 1890. It's nothing to do with Burns at all. Nothing.
So David Manclark got it wrong then.
Absolutely. That would be the
first time.
Thank you, Stuart Donaldson.
Listen, I know a modern day author who's an expert on Burns, and he wrote it until he got shown it was wrong. Gerald Crothers, the professor at Glasgow University, had a big argument with AJ, and he had to admit, sorry, he didn't write it. So they've all got it wrong. Even I got it wrong once.
This could
That's
mean
unusual.
Could mean this French translator was correct in omitting it then.
Well done, past master Ian. It took another Ayrshire man to give an excellent rendering of the immortal memory.
Okay, Brennan, I'm going to give you 5.
Good night, all. Thanks very much, Ian. Very much, Gordon.
Everybody.
Great
lecture, mate.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
3.
Gordon, thank you for bringing it to us. It was a super night.
Thanks, Alan.
Gordon,
well done.
Will there be anything posted on the Karachi regarding Sunday?
Yes, there will be. It's on there already, Eagle.
Okay, thank you.
Give you 2, Brennan.
Gordon, I think Alec would have enjoyed that, loved that tonight. Thanks very much for your help.
Pleasure, Walter. And 1. Thank you, brother Ian Doole, past Master of the Lodge, Motherkill winning, our speaker this evening to celebrate Scotland's Bard.
Thank you.